Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 from the Florida Redbook. We're going to continue with the lecture, kind of talk about some of the other things that are related to the state. I've tried to isolate the coding structure and really highlight the stuff that the Florida Department of Education website stresses on full-time equivalencies and funding. That's what you need to remember and focus on when you're thinking about some of the rest of the stuff for the rest of the course. So really think about these ideas behind full-time equivalency, and that should be really what your focus is when you're looking at the rest of the course. So the FEFP, as we spoke about in the last chapter, really that's the focus of chapter 5. I'm focusing on what makes somebody full-time equivalent, because that's important. You need to know that because that's how a school determines how many assistant principals they get, also how many teachers they get as well, or paraprofessionals. So this really determines where that money comes from and where that funding comes from. So this will probably be difficult to read on the slideshow, but I took this directly from the Florida Department of Education website, and that's why you have the PowerPoints in front of you. Your first calculation is done with legislator significance. This allows us to calculate how much money is actually going to be, how many students are going to be in the school, and then that's going to give you your first initial calculation of the students and what can be expected. Then the next one, the second calculation, you get it's however taxes are structured, who pays taxes, who's living in the district currently during that period, and some of you that are in more urban areas, you know that there's massive movement between it. Nobody in here is Miami-Dade County, but you know this is kind of a problem, kind of the transient nature of Miami. So that calculation looks at the tax systems. The third calculation, in October, there's a district survey of full-time equivalency. So the building principal and the district have to submit that, how many students are in there, and then they base the next allocation off of that. So the next chunk from January 10th to April 26th is based off of that. Then there's another full-time equivalency calculation in February, and then the next allocation for the remainder of the school year, May 10th through June 26th, is based off of that. And then you adjust it based off of what the actual receipts of June are. So we are in a unique state here that there are 5 calculations of full-time equivalency. I've seen more in Washington, D.C. Don't quote me on this, I think it's 8 or 9. But in Florida, there's 5, and that's a lot more. In Pennsylvania, I only had to submit this 3 times during the year. But that's slightly different, and it's why I'm trying to highlight stuff that's specific to Florida so that you kind of have an idea on that. So what makes somebody a student, a full-time student? In grades 4 through 12, you have to have 900 hours of instruction. In pre-K through 3, 720 hours of instruction. If you are on an experimental calendar or double session, which some of you that are in magnet schools or IB schools may be on this, it has a reduced amount of hours of instruction to meet the minimum, and that's just something, if there's a different session or if it's a different schedule, it's a different type of equivalency. But for the most part, grades 4 through 12, 900 hours, grades pre-K through 3rd is 720, and that's standard throughout the United States. So dual enrollment is pretty unique here, because dual enrollment has to, in order for it to exist, it has to earn credit at both institutions. So it has to lead to a high school diploma and a career certificate or an associate or bachelor's degree. So that's unique, that it has to be earned at both institutions. So if you're doing dual enrollment, it has to count at the high school level and it has to count at the college level. Once again, this is something else that I wasn't used to when I was looking at the system, because in a lot of ways, dual enrollment, you can use it as a substitute, but not as a credit earning mechanism. And I've seen that, I saw that significantly in Ohio, where people would use course substitutes in place of it. Career education is available for dual enrollment, but it doesn't isolate you in a career course. That shouldn't surprise you. That's really one of the missions of of career technical centers anyway. So early admission allows you to start your associate's or bachelor's degree early, and it permits you to earn courses, or earn credit that will be eligible for post-secondary institutions, and we do permit that in here. And if you're able to do it, you can start as soon as 9th grade for early admission if you meet the qualifications. That's something else that I think is interesting for Florida. So, paraprofessionals have specific programs and specific funding and specific classifications. How they're funded is dependent on what area of the code they're structured in. If they're shifted throughout the year, the building has to attribute that shift to a specific code and specific classification. I think that's another big idea as well, because that's slightly different in this state. It's not just a generic paraprofessional coding structure. They're assigned to a program, and the program gets the funding for that. So I was very interested in the cost factors when I was going through the Florida Department of Education website, and I couldn't find anything on this. I have seen, when you look at cost factors, and this is basically what the population is and what the full-time equivalency is, Florida takes a 3-year average. I am used to seeing a 5-year average in most states. I could not find any reason why Florida does 3. If anybody knows, I would be interested in knowing. I searched all throughout the internet, I asked questions, I was told that's just the way it is here, but that makes your strategic planning that much more important, right? Because you're not just looking at, a 5-year progression of students coming in or growing into the district. You're looking at a 3, but I think because Florida shifts so frequently, it's a 3-year weighted average. So if you're in a district that's growing or shrinking, try to keep that in your back pocket. So what is this? This is your basic programs, and everything is based off of 4th through 8th grade in throughout the United States. I mean, this is where your cost factors come in. So your weight is going to be allocated really at that level, and then you'll get slightly more of a weight in K3, slightly more in 9-12, but everything's always built around 4th through 8th grade. That is your traditional cost rate, what it is for your cost per student in your building, and then obviously in exceptional student education, your special education, your different levels of support depending on what the student needs. There's a higher full-time equivalency factor. So the basic student fund allocation for 2014 in the state was $4,031.77 per student. So one of the things that you do is you take this and then you weight it based off of what was on the previous page. So for your average 4th through 8th grade student, it's $4,031.77. That's how you classify what student rate you're getting to fund your school. I'm not worried about sparsity or urban or supplements like that. I think you can do that on your own, or that's district specific, and obviously some of you are in much smaller districts, so that's slightly different. So you can figure that on your own. I thought this was interesting too. This is completely new to me. I've never heard of this outside of Florida. If you teach an international baccalaureate or AP course, and a student scores 4 or higher, you can earn a bonus of $50 up to $2,000 per school year. In additional bonuses given if you have one student scoring a 4 or higher and your school has a D or F grade and they're still offering the courses. I never dealt with a system that did this. This is completely new to me. I've not heard of this outside of Florida. But it's an advantage to teaching these courses. It's an extra stipend that you get for taking on one of the more challenging classes. I didn't get this when I taught AP Computer Science. It would have been nice, but it's something slightly different for me. The other program that's Florida specific is the Safe Schools Project. I'm going to talk briefly about the criteria that make up the program, but each district gets a minimum of $62,000 that goes towards this notion of safe schools and what safe schools are supposed to be. The activities that this can fund are after-school programs for middle school students, which, in terms of safe schools, I would argue that's who needs it the most. Middle and high school programs for correction of discipline problems, so there's an after-school program for remediation. be funded through that. Anything that's, if there's a professional development on conflict resolution, any behavior-driven intervention programs, you'll see a lot of this at the elementary school. Any alternative school programs, which a lot of you work in districts that have separate alternative schools, and it's not just one that's kind of there. Suicide prevention, bullying prevention and intervention, school resource officers, and then detection dogs. Yeah, so that surprises me too. I'm not used to this being funded in schools. Really, I worked in a district that did it, but I worked in other districts that were completely against that. So once again, if I would know kind of more about the system, I would be very interested to know how much funding comes from that. But that jumped out at me that we fund so the dogs can come in and do drug searches in the state. I know a lot of states there would be big issues with the Fourth Amendment against that probably, but that's a property and classification thing, I suppose. So Chapter 6 are your internal service funds. This is pretty simple. I mean, these are things that are just your joint programs, anything that's a subcontracting out of services. They tend to come in here. There's really not much to say about this. One of the key ideas that I think is worth noting is this idea that any rent or service charge due to the host school district's general fund should be charged to the fund. So basically what that means is that if you're getting rent or you're renting out a facility, that's charged in a separate fund and a separate account than a general fund structure. So if you're renting out, the best way that I guess I could classify this, if you're renting out, in Oklahoma we run agriculture stuff all the time, and the students have to go out to an agriculture center. So that money wouldn't be classified, even though it's for instructional purposes. It would be done in this separate fund and separate account system. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What is permitted by the Florida Education Consortium? What kind of programs? Obviously, the programs, teacher education, in-service training for non-instructional personnel. Good that they do that. Anything with student testing, state and federal mandated programs, and then the functions are your basic services that you receive, whether they're instructional, whether they're fiscal, whether it's for printing, whether it's for media services, purchasing, that sort of thing. So those are classified as functions and not classified as programs. So I mentioned this last chapter. This is a big idea. This is an important part of any set of funding from the state, and I'm giving these word for word from the Red Book, and I'm going to explain each one of these. But you need to know the 4 different types of fiduciary funds in this state. That's a big idea, and I think that's important and worthy of your time and your classification. So benefit pension plans in Florida are very, very, very important. The planning for people to retire in the state is unique because we do have an aged population here, and the resources that are in those plans really define who gets what money and what it stands for. So it could come in the form of the Florida Retirement Plan or other contribution plans as well. So investment trust funds, the district can invest money into a trust fund in hopes of a long-term financial gain. Whether you do that or not, it's encouraged, not encouraged, but I believe that they should be open access so everybody knows where the money is going. If you're putting money that the district has in a trust fund that's eventually going to go to pension or retirement, you need to know where it's coming from. So private purpose trust funds is big in this state because of the number of endowments that a lot of your schools and your school systems have. So these are things like private organizations, government decisions, things like that. Anything that deals with endowments or scholarships, which endowments are a big part of colleges in the state. So keep that in mind. That's kind of a big idea here. But that goes into a private purpose trust fund account. So agency funds, anything that is just kind of in a holding pattern. The district has money and they're going to be entering this big building project in the next year or two, so they just keep money in this agency fund and they just hold it. And it just sits in the account until it's ready to be used and disseminated. So Chapter 8 is even simpler. I mean, we're looking at internal funds by the school, and that's basically just as defined. Anything that's handled during the working hours It's just collected, and it's supposed to follow school board rules of how it's collected. So the state sets procedure, the board implements it. So the big idea here that I think is worth mentioning is that funds that are collected from the school, they should have pre-numbered receipts. There should be a report of it collected. Any tickets that you sell should be pre-numbered, and those of you that work in athletics know that can be challenging. As somebody who was a theater, did the theater and did the musicals when I was teaching, we had to use pre-numbered tickets. We had to report all funds, and you have to collect the money in the school office as long as you can, and it has to be deposited 5 business days after you have a receipt for it. So the principal's responsible for everything. You can't pre-sign checks, and I bold that, I cap it. That's important because many of the issues that we have with people embezzling comes from pre-signed checks, and that's just the truth of the matter fact of it. So the principal has to seek reimbursement if there's an unpaid check, and they have to be notified of any errors in deposits and take appropriate action if necessary. So any restricted expenditures can't come from internal funds. So anything related to curriculum, travel, equipment supplies, postage, anything for curriculum use, or or memberships to professional organizations, which that's not really funded for principals in the state unless the district gets a grant to do it. But it shouldn't be made except from trust funds that has a purpose, that's what they're for. So those aren't going to come from your school funding. So fundraising should be controlled by the building principals. It doesn't specify that it should be controlled at the building level or district level, and I looked into this as well. Principals should be working together to determine who's doing what in terms of fundraising and ensure the purposes are worthwhile. One of the no-nos in fundraising came from the Department of Education, and I thought this was interesting to note because in Pennsylvania, with our 501 school districts, we had the 50-50 raffle, and that's a big deal in a lot of our school systems. Like the activities, but you're not supposed to be doing that, is a way to raise funds or raise money because it's a game of chance. So I'm not asking questions, but I'm shocked that Florida doesn't do that. Maybe they do it, maybe it's not reported anywhere, which would be an issue itself, but raffles should not be conducted for school-connected activities. I thought that was unique. Fundraising activities for which students are charged an admission can't be during school hours. I think that's standard fare across the United States. So you have to make sure that the district approves the fundraising activity. The superintendent or somebody designated from the board has to approve it, and that's how we determine what policies are used for fundraising. So that's it. This was about 20 minutes, so I gave you 45 minutes today, and I want to give you an idea to things that are Florida specific, and that's covering the Redbook in less than an hour, but it's important. And if I can do anything to help, let me know, but that's what I thought that was specific to this state that was probably the most important. So hope you got something out of that. If I can do anything else to help, let me know. Thank you.